Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So, as we come to you today in the Northern Hemisphere, winter is here. The winter solstice is just a few days away. And Martin, you and I, we wanted to bring an offering to the table. We live in a world where, as winter comes, the natural space, our inclinations as mammals are to slow down and be quiet, to rest, to hibernate. What our society and culture often pushes is a ramping up. We just got done with what was on record the biggest holiday travel season ever in the United States, and we're going into another one here very shortly. So there's a lot of hustle and bustle. There's massive amounts of people moving around. There's a lot of money being spent. A lot of work projects are coming to a head as the calendar year comes to a close. And yet, the silence, the quiet, the peace, the simplicity of winter is something that is so key, especially in this time as winter changes because of the climate change. Winter here in the mid-Atlantic, where you and I are, Martin, I want to note this, is quite mild, and we get less snow. We get less storms of any kind, really, because often there can be rain. So there is this very gray, soft quality, especially to the day that we're recording. And for me, there's that intuition to do less and be silent and really sit with what occurs in the winter cycle. A lot of it is attributed to a notion of death in our different cultures over the globe. And really, it's a time of rest, I think. It's a time of rejuvenation. It's a time of bringing one's own life at that time into reflection. That was a big part of what drove this idea today.
To begin, I'd like to speak to the notion of climate change, the notion of a high level of activity occurring in many parts of the world during these holiday seasons. Beginning with climate change, my offering is mild winter, deep, cold, snowy, wintry winter. Sure, it matters. And it really doesn't matter in terms of our need to slow down, our need to embrace the energetics that are the winter season, that are the element of water, to go into the depths of our being and whatever our version of a cocoon is, our version of hibernation, to allow that to occur. I have no expectation, maybe a hope, but not an expectation that anyone's going to hibernate like I do.
How do you do it?
There's frankly just less doings.
I see.
There's a lot more of a willingness to be, to recognize that whatever my callings in life may be on a hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis, to what degree my work may or may not carry me into the doings of life, to acknowledge that the winter is in many ways different than the state of rest that I might embrace in the summertime. This may sound strange to many, but we exist within cycles, within cycles, within cycles. In other words, in an hour's time, we may move through all of the energetics
Hmm.
of a cycle of seasons. So that's the micro expression. How it could be in 5 minutes. We could experience emotionally the grief of or the letting go of the fall. We could let go into the stillness and in some ways the sense of wonder that comes with the winter time. We could step into the creativity that arises with the spring, the movement, the decision making that comes energetically with the spring season, the joy, the partnership of the summer, and then ultimately the gratitude, the groundedness that comes with the late summer. In the five element perspective, there's five seasons, with the late summer being the season that most of the time we don't acknowledge here in the United States, yet we all feel it,
Mm.
especially here in the mid-Atlantic, where, and anywhere destination south. But the truth is, you can be up in upper state New York or Vermont, and you could experience that sense in July, late July, early August, where the air gets thicker. You can feel the air has shifted. It's still warm. It just has a thicker quality to it, is the way that I always encourage people to bring their awareness to it. Life in general feels a little thicker than it was. Whereas the summer, it was like this very light, very sort of kinetic time. It begins to slow down
Right.
in the late summer. So we have those five seasons. We have those energetics of the five elements as they exist within those seasons. And then we have cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles of expression of those energetics. And then, really, part and parcel of that, we have the recognition that on a certain very deep level, for most of the world, people are hungering for something that they really don't know how to access, which is a willingness on every level to step into their depths. For many people, it's they feel it, but they don't have words for it. They feel it and they don't know how to approach it. Like there's not a name for it in their inner language. In large measure, they've existed at this fairly superficial level. And for them to go into a more introspective time doesn't mean to go into silence. It means to go deeply into thought. It means going deeply into their feelings. And often their feelings that they're talking about or they're experiencing are the anxieties, the worries, the frustrations, the deep sadnesses. So when people do slow down, they're slowing down into parts of themselves that are reactive and they're going, this doesn't feel good, right? And it kind of discourages the notion that their depths carries anything other than more pain, instead of recognizing that with a stillness practice and a willingness to be very consistent, and frankly, a guide to help them navigate around their own self created traps that we all have until we have that depth of connection that allows us to, as I put it, let go into the warm embrace of the soul. Now, when I say soul, I'm not speaking of any particular dogma or doctrines. I'm simply saying dwelling in you is wisdom. Come winter time, that is the wisdom that I'm calling people to. In many ways, wisdom is associated with the winter season, with the element of water, the deep wisdom that dwells in not some of us, but all of us. And we, in many ways, need to get out of our own way so that we can experience that.
Right. There's this sense that excuses that we can make dwell in the deep sadness, the anxiety, and the worry. And then you speak of the water element in this winter sense and in the five element sense. And I feel the flow of that wisdom. That flow can really only happen when we do get out of our own way. If we're really taking this visual, metaphorical thing, yes, that's what it sounds like through words, but we're really speaking through that inner practice where diving deep in to experience some of that discomfort, to reflect on what's uncomfortable and breathe into the sorrow and the grief of that it's been uncomfortable, that there have been these obstacles that have been created largely by, one's own inner choices, inner narrative. Letting go into this as we talk about really consistently on the podcast. It started with letting go of the on-off switch, and it's come up really in some form in every episode because this is the core practice of being And I'm really glad that you took that, how do you do it, into saying, well, I'm simply being in this way a little bit more with this element because of the winter time. When we look at the winter solstice in different cultures throughout history, different practices, even rituals, what do you take in terms of your reading and your knowledge and your practice? How do you receive that sacredness of sacred human celebrations in this way?
So there's that word communitas, right? Shared experience within the sacred. The notion that it can be a priestly form led by an officiant, or it can be simply a shared experience of being connected through a sacred thread that gives us the recognition that, number one, we're all connected. We're all inherently at oneness with each other. Now, whether or not we've been able to get out of our own way to recognize that, that varies so much from human being to human being. Some people can experience that with their lover some of the time. Other people can experience it through their deep and abiding friendships. There's others that see it more universally, that their service work for humanity is that expression of the oneness. And then there's others that see it on a more, we'll call it an unseeing way. And often I think people see this particular expression a little bit on the woo-woo side of things, but my offering is that there are things that I know about my own inner being that are, on some level, it's deeply personal, and yet it's also deeply true. And I can know of my connection to all who are and have been and will be, whether it's in human form or any form of being on this planet and all the others, right? There's an awareness I can have of that all of us are made of stardust, that we've all been here and will forever exist in some form. From beginning, whatever the beginning, that word beginning means. And on some level, I would offer life in that sense has no beginning and no end. And yet we exist in this very linear world. So therefore, where do we take that other than into beginning, middle, and end? And yet, if we can allow ourselves the recognition that I'll always be, and therefore it's simply a question of what form. Letting, that's part of the letting go into, right? And that letting go into gives what I just expressed a grounding point, a point of expression, right? An awareness that I can be largely introverted, largely introspective, largely not per se out in the world's doings, and yet be connected in deeply meaningful ways. Introspection need not only be seen through our woundedness. Introspection and introversion can be deeply nourishing states for those willing to explore that, and that one need not be an introvert to experience introversion. I have my very extroverted moments and times with people. My overall balance, because of the nature of my calling in life, leans more to the notion of being very comfortable spending time alone. Whether that aloneness be, my aloneness is always accompanied by my dog Bear. So in that way, I'm never really alone because he's always with me. That said, it's a different kind of relationship, just like the relationship that I have that's deeply nourishing with the notion of place, of being here at Simplicity Farm and without fail every day being out in the forest and having that time. That's also about being deeply connected. So we all have that version of it. And I made an allusion to the notion that it need not be an expression of woundedness. What I meant by that is all too often, whether it be because of mental emotional challenges or physical illness, so many people in our incredibly active world associate downtime as a form of, oh, I'm wounded, I need to stop, instead of I'm stopping because it feeds me. It's a form of nourishment. It's a form of necessity. If we're going to have a healthy balance, if we're going to have a world that's sustainable, at least a world sustainable for human beings. Because if we don't pause collectively, and I would offer for good or for bad and for ugly, COVID was that moment. It was a collective pause. And some people took a lot of learning from it, and others couldn't wait for it to end. And I'm not justifying the need for pandemics. I'm justifying the notion that if we're going to need to slow down, learn within yourself, let go into the possibility that you can, whether it be come winter time within the energy of winter, or it's the weekend, or it's evening time, or whatever your rest time in the day. Take your personal winter and be still with it.
I'm stopping because I'm stopping. It doesn't have to be any other narrative with that.
Yeah, right. And I don't have to negate that stop, but rather celebrate it. And that often means if I'm going to celebrate it, I have to be willing to deal with the anxious thoughts, the worriedness, and really practice with it and bring resources into my life so that I can. Because my belief and my knowledge is if someone with as much trauma as I had can do this work, anyone can. Trauma, anxious, worried, self negating patterns, if those are in your way, know that there are practices you can embody that can shift the paradigm for you.
So when you're talking about the celebration of diving into those places where one feels anxiety and feeling the wholeness of that, it takes me back to something in the book, Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity. This notion of being a kaleidoscope. And to share that, I think the simplest way is just to read that preface. The preface is entitled A Spy in the House of Love. Being a spy in any story speaks to an existence that dwells in the darkness at the edges of life. To live as a spy in one's own story is to exist in the gray, while also understanding that there is a life one spies upon that vibrates in color like a kaleidoscope. A kaleidoscope being an optical device consisting of mirrors that reflect images of bits of colored glass in a symmetrical geometric design through a viewer. The design may be changed endlessly by rotating the section containing the loose fragments. The name is derived from the Greek words kalos, beautiful, and eidos, form, and scoping, to view. Through the kaleidoscope, the spy views the beautiful forms, but doesn't actively take part in their expression. Life is spied upon from the outside. For many, life is experienced this way. Some combination of anxiety, worry, frustration, and deep sadness or depression, along with trauma, can keep us from forming within ourselves the colored glass and its endless formations. I know this to be true in my own life, and it was the pain of knowing a fuller and more vibrant life was possible, but not being lived, that was the catalyst of change in my life. It meant, however, letting go of my safe perch, getting out of one's own way, to interject. To be willing to be vulnerable in how the light might shine upon me, what it might illuminate that I had been hiding away, and so marked a demarcation point in my life to practice more fully being myself to listen to the quiet and wise voice deep within, to embrace my imperfections. I began a new chapter, one that was initially very messy, even internally volatile at times. In many ways, it was no more messy nor volatile than before, but different in the most important of ways. I no longer felt like I was sitting on the sideline waiting for life to start. A spy no more. I am the multicolored pieces of glass creating endless, beautiful forms of light.
What I'm reminded of is that experience, that sharing of that choice I made many years ago is no less a choice I need to make every day. That allowing my light to shine, allowing my a willingness to be authentically myself, knowing that at times I'll do it with clarity and ease and authenticity, and other times it will feel more like a wrestling match with myself.
Hmm.
And regardless, willing to practice. It's that lovely axiom of the master has failed more times than the student has tried. And the recognition that while I'm not taking on the role of master, I am in the midst of a practice. And when I say not taking on the role of master, what I mean by that is yes, I embrace the role of teacher or guide. I embrace the notion of practicing in a way that embraces mastery without the hierarchical notion that there is the need for an overlord, an energy that rests over whomever is out there. This very, very, in my book, in the very first chapter with ascension culture, that I don't want to play the role of someone resting on a pedestal above others. I want my students to know that whether we're talking about Yeshua ben Joseph or the Buddha or whomever, everyone on this planet has moments of great pain, of great challenge. And the point isn't to place anyone or anything on a pedestal, but rather to recognize there are people on the planet, and I put myself in that category, who are deeply committed to inner practice. And my word of encouragement is, whether it be me or someone else, find someone who's walking their talk, who you feel a sense of calling to connect with, and allow them to guide you, allow them to support you. Because in the absence of that, there will be myriads of blind spots that, unless you're willing to be vulnerable with yourself and with the teacher, you won't see them. And that's what I'm encouraging people to be, is in essence vulnerable with themselves. Because in that letting go, yeah, the heart cracks open over and over again. And something wondrous arises out of that. And in many ways, that's what we're speaking of when we speak of the winter solstice. It's that seasonal recognition that for half the year we move into darkness, and in this single moment, there's a return to light. And whether that metaphor exists seasonally once a year, or it exists every day within our lives as a recognition of our own light, of our own inner being. I'm very aware that a topic that we've been planning within our own process around the podcasting is around the concept of soul journaling. And I wanted to offer to our listening audience that we're going to be sharing a very specific kind of practice that you can employ in your meditation practice or as an accompaniment to your meditation practice. I think of it as part and parcel of the process, and that is soul journaling. And it's literally the practice of learning the language of your soul through writing through the soul's voice onto the page or through the keyboard. The willingness to go to that deep, wise, still place and give yourself permission to allow that voice within you to find expression. So, our next pod will be soul journaling.
That's going to be a wonderful way to wrap up the calendar year and really flow from the last few episodes of working easefully, being introspective with that winter time, winter solstice energy, and then what that really means personally when you're taking a sense of being, not doing, but being within that soul journaling process. Talking about this time of year and the winter solstice, specifically on Saturday, December 21st. Martin, you're going to be hosting at Simplicity Farm a celebration, communitas, in the great sense of that. So, if you'd like to attend the Winter Solstice celebration, do go over to martinperkins.com and check out the upcoming events. It's free. It's going to be a potluck. So, if you'd like to bring a dish, please do so. There's going to be a lovely bonfire starting that evening. And before the bonfire takes place, there's going to be a silent meditation, really opportunity in that community setting to practice some of the things that we've been speaking on today. And, you know, as we reflect on the nature of the podcast this first year of doing it, what we've been talking about every time we've come to you over the airwaves, so to speak. So that's going to happen Saturday, December 21st, starting at dusk at Simplicity Farm. Do go over to martinperkins.com to get all the details. And over there, you can also catch up with the movie club. The next showing will be of Inside Out 2 at Simplicity Farm on Sunday, January 5th. You can watch that on your own time. Maybe you've already seen it. Maybe you want to see it again. Then you can join us for discussion on Thursday, January 9th via Zoom. Martin, thank you so much for your time today. It's very appreciated. Your insight, your presence, and just the little breadcrumbs that come together into the loaf of wisdom and shared experience.
Thank you, Ben. It's a joy to do this work with you.
Likewise. Until next time.